Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. And today I'm going to be doing something a little different. This is the last video that I'll be putting out for my Shark Week tie-in series. And rather than reviewing another shark movie, I decided to, again, do something different. Because this year is the 45th anniversary of Jaws, my third favorite movie of all time. So I figured it'd be wrong if I didn't talk about Jaws in some sort of capacity. And also I wanted to revisit Jaws 2 from 1978, which I've already done a review for as well. But due to some of the reception that this movie has gotten over the past couple of years, I figured it would be a good time to take a look back at this sequel and see, is it better than we remember? Is it better than I remember? But first, let's just dive into Jaws. Now, I'm not going to review this movie because I've already reviewed it. There's not much I could say about it that hasn't been said. It's just, again, it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's my third favorite film of all time. So the best thing I could talk about in terms of celebrating this film's legacy is the impact that it had on me, because, I mean, you never forget the first time you see Jaws, or even the first time you even know about this movie. So if you weren't alive back in the 90s, one of the biggest things that I'd love to do was run through Blockbuster or any type of video store. And even if my family and I wouldn't rent any of the movies there, I would just love seeing all the VHS tapes. I mean, the days of Blockbuster actually led to my discovery of Godzilla, because I saw so many Godzilla VHS tapes on display there that I was fascinated by what Godzilla was. I also discovered King Kong through running around Blockbuster. I discovered VHS artwork for many types of horror movies, whether they be bad or good. And one of the bigger discoveries was, of course, Jaws. And just that poster, like that poster for Jaws is iconic. Just the shark coming up from the water about to grab the girl. It's an iconic image. You can never forget it. But, much like with the Godzilla series, it took me a while before I actually decided to watch Jaws. By this time, I had seen Jurassic Park, so I had already seen what Spielberg can deliver with a creature feature, even though both Jaws and Jurassic Park are so much better than the average creature feature. But with Jaws, it wasn't until a trip to San Antonio, Texas. We were visiting family members living in Texas. There was a Hollywood video close by to where my grandparents used to live. And I don't know what prompted this to happen, but my parents just rented Jaws on VHS. We watched it at my grandparents' house. I think my grandparents were off doing something else because they didn't want to see Jaws. And the first time seeing Jaws, like I said, is something that you don't forget. Like, you never forget seeing Jaws for the first time. Like, I'll never forget the first time I saw Chrissy's death. Never forgot the moment you first saw that shark pop up and drag the guy down into the pond and see his leg fall to the ocean bottom. Like, that's creepy. You never forget the first time you see this scene. What kind of shark? Tiger shark. A what? You never forget that chilling scene where Quint tells the story of the USS Indianapolis and why he's kind of crazy. You never forget the shark blowing up. You just never forget those moments. But the one thing that really stood to me is the impact Jaws left after seeing it for the first time. If I'm going to be honest, Jaws didn't really make me afraid to take bats. What it made me afraid of more than anything was a shark coming out from underneath the bed, or even a couch, and just dragging me under. Like, that was more terrifying than anything. And I don't think I actually got any sleep that night after seeing Jaws. Like, I liked it when I first saw it, but it creeped the hell out of me. And what did I do the very next day? Watched it again. Yeah, the very next night, I asked my mom if we could watch Jaws again. And we put it on again, and the very same scenarios happened all over again. And one moment in particular that always stuck with me was covering my eyes in the scene where Hooper is at Ben Gardner's boat underwater, and then his head just pops out, and you see a missing eye. Both times I saw Jaws for the first time, my eyes were covered during that moment, and all I could hear was the audio. I could hear the screech, I could hear the music amping up. And the very next image I saw when I uncovered my eyes was Hooper coming out of the water, terrified as hell. And I wouldn't see that moment for another 7 years, actually. Because even though I saw Jaws 2 nights in a row as my first time seeing it, that movie left me scared. And I never forget that moment in the trailer where you have the narrator saying, "See it before you go swimming." It definitely made me a little more hesitant about going into the water at beaches. And then, as I mentioned, 7 years go by. I first saw Jaws in 1998, and cut to 2005. I see Jaws again on Turner Classic Movies, and I just have a much bigger appreciation for it. I'm a little less scared of the movie. I bought the DVD because of the 30th anniversary, and slowly over time, I've just grown to love the movie more and more and more and more. And it was also around that time where I saw the sequels, so watching the sequels kind of eased me into rewatching the first movie again and not being as scared. And then the impact that Jaws left on me personally was everlasting. I mean, one of the biggest memories I have is going to Universal Studios Hollywood for the first time and going on the studio tour. And the only thing I ever cared to see on the studio tour back then was the Jaws portion. I was so amped up on when are we going to get to Jaws? When are we get to Jaws? I mean, the King Kong section was awesome, and I still, to this day, miss the old King Kong encounter. But I was so obsessed of just seeing the Jaws section of the studio tour that when we got to the Black Lagoon, where they filmed Creature from the Black Lagoon, and the tour had that old Part the Red Sea special effect, I thought that the shark was in the water, especially since there was an old special effect where bubbles kept coming out of the water. I thought, "Shark! Shark!" And then when the tram goes through the water as it's parted, I keep anticipating a shark to come out of the water as the tram's driving by. But no, we had to wait a few more minutes to get to Jaws. And when we finally got to the Jaws section, again, it's something like the first movie you don't forget. And I remember being there when they had the old fisherman George, rather than scuba diver, who sometimes is known as George. And again, it's a moment that I don't forget, really. I remember the fin coming out of the water. I remember the fisherman getting dragged into the water with his boat. And I remember the really fake geyser of blood that came out. It didn't look realistic at all, but I guess there was a charm, especially since the tour guides had the famous line of, "He had a lot of guts being out there." Ooh, there they are, they're the guts. Oh, that's terrible. And then you had the shark itself. I remember when I first went on the studio tour, this is when they had removed the fire effect. So the fire effect was not there, and I didn't even know that it had a fire effect originally. But I remember the second the fisherman was dragged into the water, the shark pops up and starts attacking the tram. And I remember that the road that the tram was on would tilt to the side because the shark dragged the dock, and that got you even closer to the shark. I miss that old special effect, but yeah, I remember that moment vividly, and every time I go on the studio tour as a guest, I always anticipate the Jaws section because I just love it so much, and I love that movie so much. And that's the personal effects that Jaws had on me as a kid. And watching this movie continuously as an adult, you really get a lot of appreciation for this movie. Obviously, there's the infamous behind the scenes where the shark barely worked. So Spielberg was forced to shoot around the shark, and what he ended up doing was using the camera as the shark's perspective, which made it even more scary. And as much as the shark does look fake, I still find the shark to be incredibly terrifying when it actually shows up. And again, John Williams' score is iconic. What really sticks out to me, especially in this year, 2020, is how Jaws holds up in terms of a political standpoint. I'm not going to get too political, but I rewatched this movie on the day of its 45th anniversary, and it's pretty strange watching it knowing that we are pretty much going through the same scenarios. We have this huge problem going on in our world right now, and yet we have a government official that is just kind of denying it and trying to play it down as much as possible. Except in Jaws' case, when this problem eventually swims up and bites him in the ass, he takes action as opposed to the real world where such action doesn't exist, unfortunately. So that's a testament to how great this movie is, that it can still remain relevant even 45 years later. And every time I watch this movie, I always discover something new and something I've never really noticed before. Like the sequence where Alex Kintner gets killed, which, by the way, as a kid, always scared the hell out of me more than anything else in the movie, just because it's a kid with my name getting killed by a shark in the most brutal way possible. That sticks with you. Like, that is horrifying, especially seeing the movie as a 7-year-old. Yeah, I saw this movie at 7 years old, so you can do the math there. But anyway, something that I noticed is that when everyone's getting out of the water, there is one guy going into the water to get his kid who looks way too happy to be just going into the water to grab his kid from the safety of a shark. It's just like he runs in like this. He's all enthusiastic about it. It's like, wow. And then there's the scene where Ben Gardner and the other fishermen in Amity are just going out to try to get the shark, and they're throwing dynamite in the water, they're chumming the water. And I actually saw this movie on the big screen at the Writers Guild in 2015 for its 40th anniversary. You saw a shot of the cameraman on Ben Gardner's boat basically filming the stuff that Ben Gardner was going to see. So that's a little production goof. I mean, there's really not much to say about this movie. It's just really iconic. It's incredible. It really is a true masterpiece in every sense of the word. So let's move on to Jaws 2, because I actually debated on whether I wanted to do this as 2 parts. Ultimately decided to do it as 1, because there's an element in Jaws 2 that easily ties into the first Jaws. And again, it's a political standpoint. But yeah, Jaws 2. For the longest time, when it comes to the Jaws sequels, people often will go to Jaws 3D or Jaws the Revenge. Not because they're better, but because they're so bad that they're more memorable. And a lot of people have said that Jaws 2 is just kind of there and just kind of okay. But ever since its 40th anniversary 2 years ago, I've realized that Jaws 2 has started to get a resurgence in popularity. And a lot of people are looking at it and saying, you know, it's actually a lot better than you imagine it to be. So soon after I rewatched Jaws for the millionth time, I rewatched Jaws 2, and my opinion on this movie has actually come around a bit. I think I remember in my original review, I said it was okay. I think I said watch at your own risk. But watching this movie again, it's good. And honestly, between Jaws 2 and Deep Blue Sea, I'd honestly take Jaws 2 any day, because there's a lot that can be admired about this movie. For one, it's structured like a teen slasher movie, which might not be a whole lot to admire, but you actually can admire the movie for having that structure, because Halloween came out in 1978 as well, and is the movie that pretty much kicked off that subgenre. But Jaws 2 holds the unique distinction for predating Halloween by only 4 months. So the fact that Jaws 2 has the structure of a slasher movie, but came out before Halloween, is pretty fascinating. And what makes this better than most slasher movies that would eventually come out is that the teens aren't a bunch of horny douchebags. No, the group of teens in this movie are actually portrayed as being really good friends. They just love hanging out in the summer, going sailing, and you like these people. I mean, they're not super interesting, and if there's honestly one weak actor in that group, it is the actor playing Michael Brody, who is bad. Like, he's really bad in the movie, but everyone else is likable enough to where you go, yeah, I want to be friends with these people. And maybe John Williams' score also helps with that feeling of you wanting to be friends with these people. And then, yeah, John Williams' score is great as well. And much like he does with Star Wars or any of his other scores to sequels, he will make entirely new compositions and not kind of rehash the same score the first time around. Like he did it with Star Wars compared to Empire Strikes Back, Jurassic Park compared to The Lost World. Harry Potter and Chamber of Secrets is a slightly different story, but he did it with Prisoner of Azkaban compared to The Sorcerer's Stone. He's really great at making new compositions, but sticking to what the film is supposed to feel like. And his score is definitely, I think, underappreciated. And then there's the most famous thing about the movie that, whether you like it or not, you can't deny that it's the most famous, is Roy Scheider. I mean, Roy Scheider comes back in this movie as Chief Brody, and it's well documented that he did not want to do this movie at all. And when you watch it, he actually does a really good job, and he's the only character who's actually carrying this movie on his shoulders. But you can also tell that he did not want to be there. Much like with the first Jaws, Jaws 2 experienced a lot of production troubles, and a lot of the more famous stories come from the fact that Roy Scheider did not want to do this movie. The story goes is that he was contracted to do Deer Hunter. He had a contract with Universal at the time, and 2 weeks before Deer Hunter was supposed to shoot, he walked off, and his role was eventually replaced by Robert De Niro. So Universal was mad at Scheider for doing this, but they said, if you appear in Jaws 2, then we will forgive you for walking off of Deer Hunter. And we'll even count Jaws 2 as 2 movies, that way it ends your contract. So he eventually does it, but there's also a story where Roy Scheider hated being on Jaws 2 so much that he tried to plead insanity. Like, he wrecked his hotel room. He pretty much pulled a Josh Trank and just trashed his place to try to show a level of unprofessionalism to get out of doing Jaws 2, which obviously didn't happen. But again, he still does a really good job. And there's a lot of moments in this movie where Chief Brody is actually drunk. And I would love to think that that's not in the script, that it's actually Roy Scheider being drunk just so he can get through the days of filming Jaws 2. Because when you hear about him and the director, Genet Swark, getting into physical fistfights with each other over this movie, that's pretty telling that he did not want to do this movie. But again, he still does a really good job, and as much as I like the teens in this movie, Brody is the best character in the film, no question about it. And the movie is actually pretty suspenseful as well. Not as much as the first movie, obviously, but there's the sequence with the water skier, which is probably the most impressive scene in the movie, where the shark is just chasing this water skier at full speed, and you're wondering, is the shark going to get her? And of course he does. The sequence with the helicopter is a lot of fun. When the shark actually attacks the teens on the boats, there's a lot of suspense there because you're wondering who's going to make it out and who's going to get killed or attacked. And even the ending with the electrical cable is pretty suspenseful as well. Even though we ultimately know what's going to happen, it's a matter of what actually happens to get to that point. And what happens, I think, is pretty suspenseful. But the one thing that I noticed rewatching Jaws 2 that kind of ties into not only the first movie, but what's going on in today's politics, again, not to get too political, but is when Mayor Vaughn looks at Chief Brody and just kind of denies the fact that there's another shark problem, which is a stupid element of the movie, no question about it, but when you look at what's going on today, suddenly that element doesn't seem too stupid. And it actually becomes really interesting, especially when you see that Mayor Vaughn is having rank pulled on him by a hotel developer. For those of you that don't know this, during the Reagan administration, there was a guy named Don Regan who at the time was the CEO of Merrill Lynch. And he was part of Reagan's administration. There's a famous clip that Michael Moore shows in his documentary Capitalism: A Love Story, where Reagan's giving a speech, and Don Regal kind of leans in and goes, "You're going to have to speed it up." And Michael Moore goes, "Who tells the president to speed it up?" And that's kind of what's happening in Jaws, except this predates Reagan's administration, because the hotel developer is the one who's more upset at Brody for causing a panic on the beach for shooting at a school of bluefish because he thought it was a shark. And even though Brody has evidence right in front of them, the entire board, led by this developer, not Mayor Vaughn, is denying the fact that that's a shark. It's a completely ridiculous scene, but it makes a lot more sense considering what's going on today, especially when you have Brody going, "But I'm telling you, and I'm telling everyone at this table that that's a shark, and I know what a shark looks like because I've seen one up close, and you better do something about this one because I don't intend to go through that hell again." Now, if I'm going to pull back, in defense of the mayor, I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but apparently back in 1978, if a big hotel opened on a small island, that's a big deal, because the hotel developer, aka Ellen Brody's boss, is pretty much bringing in all the money for Amity. In the mayor's not defense, he's the same mayor from the first Jaws movie, and you just have to ask yourself, why are you saying all this all over again. Like, you got people killed the first time around. Why would you take that chance and just deny a shark incident again? Now, in the original novel by Peter Benchley, there's a subplot there where the town officials in Amity owe money to the mafia. So the reason why Mayor Vaughn wants all the beaches open is to bring in income so he can pay off these mob guys. And apparently that was an aspect that they were going to use in Jaws 2. One of the original scripts had that mob element, and I felt like that would have been a really interesting angle. But if I'm going to criticize this movie at all, because there's a lot to criticize, they don't play with that element as much as I feel like they should. Because most of the movie is focused on the teens. Like I mentioned, it's a slasher movie with a giant shark. It's a much better slasher movie with a shark than Shark Night was. But the one deleted scene that I wish Jaws 2 had kept in its theatrical cut was when the town officials are voting on whether or not to fire Brody. And only one person votes against firing the chief, and that's Mayor Vaughn. So if that scene had stayed in the movie, I feel like we would have gotten a lot more of an appreciation for Mayor Vaughn. But even then, he's still responsible for getting people killed. And I feel like the proper way this movie has to end is where everyone in Amity, all the town officials, get voted out because they cannot be trusted to handle a shark attack twice. So when I rewatched Jaws 2, again, there was a lot that I really liked, and I started to really come around to this movie. Again, it doesn't even hold a candle to the first Jaws, and there are a lot of things that you can criticize about this movie. For one, unlike the first Jaws movie, the shark pops up a lot, and sometimes when you get the close-up view of the shark, it looks downright silly. There are two infamous shots in this movie that kind of emphasize how bad this shark looks. The first one is when the shark is about to attack Michael Brody as his friends are pulling him over the side of the boat. The shark's mouth somehow gets skinnier, and you can see the gears inside the mouth. The other is when the shark is about to attack Sean right before the big electrical cable finale, and the shark breaches the water with this look. And you can't help but laugh at that shot when it happens. I mean, even back then, because I'm going to confess something right now. Back when I saw Jaws 2, I actually did love it as much as the first Jaws. But even then, when I watched this movie for the first time and that shot popped up, I howled with laughter because it's a ridiculous shot and it doesn't help in trying to make this shark scary. Even though it is a very cool idea to have the shark get burnt and then it's scarred on one side. I mean, it's such an iconic look for the shark that burnt look for the shark and the whole sequence where the shark dies by biting on electrical cord was used in the Jaws ride that used to be at Universal Studios Florida. And that's another thing that was part of my obsession with Jaws as the years gone by. I've actually been on Jaws the ride at Universal Studios Florida in 2006 and 2008. And it's a ride that's so iconic and so beloved that I can memorize the script in the back of my head, and I could just quote it from beginning to end. This is footage that I got of the ride's ending on my very first trip to Universal Studios Florida, and it's actually the very first video I ever uploaded onto YouTube. I uploaded it on my original channel, RealMrRobinson, and it has gotten 4.8 million views over the course of 14 years. And I just recently saw this number before doing this review, and I thought to myself, man, if I'd started doing these movie reviews in 2006, I could have been one of the most popular movie critics on YouTube, but can't dwell on the past. Jaws the ride is so good that one day I'll have to dedicate an entire video to talking about that ride. But yeah, that goes to show the impact of Jaws 2, that it inspired the ending to the Jaws ride. But then there's some stuff in Jaws 2 that inspired some pretty terrible things. The one moment that really stood out to me in terms of what was the scene with the killer whale, which first of all is an obvious jab at 1977's Orca, which if you've never seen Orca, it's a pretty weird movie. I mean, it's a movie that rips off Jaws and has a moment where the orca kills a great white shark, just as a meta way of saying, hey, we're better than you, Jaws. And then this movie comes out a year later where there's a dead orca, which is pretty much Universal looking at Dino De Laurentiis in the eye and saying, no, you are not better than us. But anyway, there's a scene where an oceanographer comes in and tries to pretty much explain what happened. And Chief Brody tries to come to the conclusion that it's a shark. And he even asks the question of, if a shark was killed, you don't think that another shark could come in and do this, do you? And then the marine biologist answers with this line, "Sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody." And at that moment, when I heard that line, I wanted to say, oh really? Maybe you should tell the rest of the Jaws movies that sharks don't take things personally, because nobody knew that apparently. And that line actually doesn't stop there. Dimitri Panos, who is one of my critic friends at the Hollywood Critics Association, he did a really great 49-minute long video on the Hollywood Critics Association channel about Jaws and bringing up bits of Jaws 2. You should definitely check out that video, and I'll link it on the side. But anyway, he told me that in the novelization for Jaws 2, it's explained that the shark was female. And not only that, it was a female that was the mate to the shark in the first Jaws, and that it was pregnant. That's kind of interesting. I mean, it's kind of dumb to have it be the mate of the first shark, but the fact that the novelization depicts it as a female is something that's kind of interesting. But then earlier today, before I started doing this video, I fell down a rabbit hole of stupidity with this moment. So follow me if you can with this. When doing research for this video and looking up a lot of information on Jaws 2, especially this particular shark, they explain that this shark was pregnant and that it gave birth to the only shark pup that it had, because sharks have this thing where they'll eat each other inside the womb of its mother, which is kind of creepy. As this shark is being electrocuted by the cord, the shark pup comes out. Again, hang with me on this. It's said that the electrocution mutated this baby shark, enhancing its DNA and allowed it to basically grow at a faster rate. And upon further investigation, I found out that the same author that wrote the novelization for Jaws 2 also wrote the novelization for Jaws the Revenge. That baby shark that was born in Jaws 2, the novelization, ended up being the shark from Jaws the Revenge. So to answer the question that Roger Ebert asked when he and Gene Siskel reviewed Jaws the Revenge, what shark is this? The shark in Jaws the Revenge, again, according to the novelizations, is the offspring of the sharks from Jaws and Jaws 2, which that itself is stupid in its own right. Like, unbelievably stupid. It doesn't help Jaws the Revenge in any sense. But it gets even dumber, because this rabbit hole goes even further when I found out that the shark in Jaws 3D, the mother, is the offspring of the shark from Jaws the Revenge. So that means the shark in Jaws 3D is the granddaughter of the sharks from Jaws and Jaws 2, and its offspring is the great-grandson of the sharks from the first two Jaws movies. Can you stick with me? Like, I fell down that rabbit hole before doing this video, and I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this is something I'd never known about the series. And again, it's all in the novelization. The movies do not go into this at all, and to be honest, I'm grateful they didn't. I mentioned this on Twitter last week before I started recording the Shark Week videos, but that is a rabbit hole of stupidity that I can't believe actually exists. We'll just wrap it up here. Yeah, Jaws is amazing. The legacy that it had on me personally and the entire world is undeniable. And after rewatching Jaws 2, I've grown a bigger appreciation for it. Like, it's so fun, it's thrilling, it's not groundbreaking or anything, but it's definitely a good movie, and probably my second favorite shark movie out there, which wasn't that hard to do, honestly. This is the last Shark Week video that I'm doing. I'm not going to be doing anything about Jaws 3D or Jaws the Revenge, because there's nothing to say about them other than they are god-awful. Especially Jaws the Revenge, which God, I hate that movie so much. And the fact that I now know about this shark family tree just makes it even more stupid. But yeah, that's Jaws and Jaws 2, and this marks the end of my series of videos tying into Shark Week 2020. And now I want to hear from you guys. What impact did Jaws leave on you when you first saw it and as time went on? And have you rewatched Jaws 2? And if so, has your opinion stayed the same? Or have you gotten a bigger appreciation for it like I have? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media. And until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.